One of the things I wish I had the opportunity to do, and even if that meant making some mistakes, was, having a bit more control over that money where he could have oversight, but let me have access to it.
What if I told you the decisions families make about savings, debt, and spending doesn't just affect their household, they affect the entire U.S. economy? Today, we're stepping inside the world of economics, financial literacy, and leadership with someone who helps understand what's happening here in Alabama and across the country. Welcome to Careers IRL, powered by Books That Build Skills, the show where we explore real stories, skills, and pathways behind fascinating careers. I'm your host, Loxley Brown, and today we're going to be going behind the scenes of a career most people hear about but don't fully understand. Today's guide is Anoop Mishra, Regional Executive for the Birmingham Office of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. He helps gather economic intelligence from business and community leaders across Alabama to better understand what's happening in our economy. He's also deeply involved in leadership across Birmingham through organizations like United Way of Central Alabama and Kiwanis International. Now, Anoop, most people hear the Fed in the news but don't understand it. Can you explain it simply?
I will try to keep this simple, but first, Loxley, thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. So the first thing to note is that it's the Fed, not the Feds. Sometimes that can carry a whole different connotation. So I am with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and the simplest way that I can think about it is that we deal with monetary policy, which simply means we do a lot of things. But when you think about trying to finance a home or trying to finance a car, and you think about what is the interest rate I need to pay, the Fed really deals with monetary policy, which helps to set what some of those interest rates are. So the lower the rates, the less you have to pay, typically monthly or annually. The higher the rates, the more you have to pay. So that's the primary lever that we have in helping to shape the economy.
What surprises most people about your work?
Well, I think when most people think of the Fed and they think of making decisions in the economy, they think that there is an algorithm that's out there and that we have brilliant economists. They do fantastic work. But there is this idea that we just plug in a bunch of numbers into a machine and it will spit out, this is where the interest rate needs to be, or this is what's going on. And I think most people would be surprised to find that even with all the data that we use, which is incredibly plentiful, there is a lot of listening and understanding to how businesses are experiencing the economy. There are a lot of contradictions in the economy. And so it is as much of an art as it is a science when we're trying to assess economic conditions.
So that makes it sound to me like there's a big human touch involved in this. It's not all a spreadsheet and numbers being crunched.
That's correct. I think one of the things that we have realized over time is that we make the best decisions when we marry data with really getting a sense of how people are experiencing the economy and what they are seeing going forward. We always say that data is great, but it's inherently backward looking. When the data tells me what the employment report was, it's telling me what it was last month or last quarter. And that's great and that's important, but we also want to get a sense of where do we think employment is going to be next month and next quarter. And to do that, it's really talking to businesses and asking them, hey, are you planning on hiring? Are you keeping headcount flat? What do costs look like for you in the second half of 2026? These kinds of questions, when married with the data, really help us to make the best decisions possible.
And what economic indicators are you watching right now?
Well, probably the number one indicator, and we look at a lot of different things, is we're looking at what inflation is doing. So from a Fed standpoint, one of our core tenets is we really need price stability. We don't want prices to go up too much or too fast. We also don't want them to go down too much or too fast. We want prices to be stable. And right now, with the Iran conflict, with tariffs, there are some upward pressure that we're seeing on prices. The price of oil, and which means gas at the pump, which means other things that oil is a foundation for. We're looking to see what those costs and what those prices are doing, because inflation, first and foremost, is really a consideration today.
Yeah. And how does what happens in Alabama reflect what's happening nationally?
Excuse me. Well, Alabama has a pretty diversified economy. If you think about advanced manufacturing, think about the auto industry that we have here. That's a big part of our overall economy. Whether it's high end vehicles like Mercedes or more value oriented vehicles like Kia and Toyota, we see a lot of that. We, also see Airbus in the manufacturing space. But we have a strong and vibrant healthcare system as well, which is a significant part of our economy. If we go up north, we see a lot more biotech and IT and defense contracting in Huntsville. Then we see ships and ports and logistics and transportation in Mobile. So we really cover a whole gamut of different sectors here in Alabama that help to inform what the overall macro environment in the country might look like.
If you had to explain the economy to a 14-year-old using everyday life, how would you describe it?
Sure. Well, the first thing I'd ask the 14-year-old is, if you had $20, what would you do with it? Would you
Yeah.
go to a store and buy an outfit? Would you go to a coffee shop and buy something there? Um, First of all, where would you get the $20 from? Well, you might have a job, or you got it from your parents who have a job. How much does that job pay? If that job paid less, or if there wasn't a job, you may not have access to that money to buy something. And then when you do have that money, how much does that product cost? If the price of a cup of coffee is variable and it may be $5 one day and $7 another day, how likely is it that you would buy that cup of coffee? So part of how I would explain to the 14-year-old is, the economy is really nothing more than saying that I have a lot of things I want to do, but do I have the capability of doing it? And so what I want to do is really the demand. What do I want to buy? Is it a product? Is it a concert I want to go to? And then the supply is, do I have the money to be able to do it? And so from a Fed standpoint, we look at the two corresponding principles. On the money side, it's inflation. Is something too expensive for me to buy? Can I get reasonable prices? And then, do I have the money? That's on the labor side. Are there jobs that pay a good wage? Can I keep my job because I'm more likely to spend money? So it's really an issue of, can I balance what there is to spend things on with what I actually have in my pocket to spend? And so creating that balance, really fundamentally, that's what economics is, and that's what we try to do at the Fed.
Yeah. Before we continue, if you're enjoying these conversations about real careers and real people, be sure to follow Careers IRL. Every week, we introduce students to a new career path and skills needed to succeed. Now, in the Charm series, the books that I write for our nonprofit, Addie learns that every decision creates consequences, whether it's managing time, planning projects, or making smart choices under pressure. She's the one who creates the budget for their trip to the STEM conference in Denver. And then this little 15-year-old has to pitch it to their sponsor to get funding. Why is financial literacy really a life skill?
Sure, because from that example you gave, all the way through when you turn 65 and you're dealing with Social Security and you're trying to figure out what my distributions should be, there is really not an aspect of your life in which you're not thinking about budgeting money and managing your needs and managing your ability to meet those needs. And that is at the heart of financial literacy. It's simply knowing that when you have $1 in your pocket, or 1,000 or $1 million in your pocket, what are your options in terms of what to do with it? How can you best manage that dollar or $1 million? And that is at the heart of financial literacy. And again, it's going to be applicable whether you have a dollar or whether you are filthy rich.
Yeah, yeah. And what financial habits should teenagers build early?
So the three I would say are save, save, save. So I would start with the principle of saving, but when you say habit, so save is a very abstract word. Okay, I want to save money, but how do you really do that? And you and I both know this is something that adults do not have an easy time with, and I think we'll talk about that later. But if I think about a specific habit, it would be that if you get a dollar or if you get $5, build a habit of assuming that you don't have a dollar or you don't have $5, you have a little bit less. Take a certain percentage of that money and put it in a place where you know you're not going to be spending it anytime soon. And there are a lot of ways to develop that habit. And it could be you have a piggy bank at home and you say, if I made $5, I want to keep four that I can go have a cup of coffee or spend. But that $1 I'm going to put in a piggy bank and I'm not going to have access to it. It could be giving it to a parent. It could be even as you get a little bit older and you have a bank account, putting it in there. But the habit is really getting used to not thinking that you have the full amount of the money that you actually have.
Mhm. And I know when we've spoken before, you told me a really funny story about your daughter. I love this story, and it's really one of those you don't know what you don't know, and we adults really need to, and that's why I love doing this podcast. It's showing all everyone out there like here's the steps to do this. And so I love the story you told me. Can you tell it to everyone?
Sure, this is the credit card, the credit card story. So when our daughter was 18 and she went off to college, she's had her bank account, but we thought we wanted to get her a credit card. One, to help build credit for her, but two, to get in the habit of making sure that she could manage, access. And then three, just having it available for emergencies. If something happened, she needed more money and she didn't have it in her account. She didn't have to come to us, that she could use it for emergency purposes. So Annika understood that, but we sat down and we talked about the fact that when you use your credit card, you need to make sure that you paying your credit card bill. And that you don't let the balances keep going, because then you have interest payments and then all of a sudden you're paying a lot more than you're supposed to. Well, I assumed that she understood what I meant by saying that you need to pay it on a regular basis. What she thought was that every time she made a credit card purchase, she had to immediately go online and pay for what she just bought. So if she was buying something, she was paying it that afternoon. And she got stressed one time and she called me up and said, "Oh my God, I forgot to pay it. I went and charged my car yesterday. And I didn't pay it." And I said, "Oh, no, 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 you don't have to pay it every day. Timely means that you want to pay it every month, because that's kind of when it's, taken. Even, every, 15 days is fine." But it didn't occur to me that she would really have no reference point for knowing that paying
Mhm.
regularly does not mean every time you make a charge. Frankly, I would rather have her have that problem than,
Yes.
6 months go by and say, "Oh, I didn't realize I was supposed to pay." So all in all, it was a story that we could easily overcome. But it just goes to show you that sometimes we as adults take things for granted that folks know, but sometimes they just don't, and they have to learn.
Now, August marks 50 years since you and your family came to America. Tell us about your family's journey coming from India to the United States of America.
Sure. Yeah, 50 years. It's hard to believe. I was 5 years old. So my dad actually came in 1974, 2 years before I did, and he came to study at the University of Alabama. He was doing his master's and PhD. He really struggled. Didn't have much money. Saved over 2.5 years enough money to bring my mom and my sister and I over, and so we came over in 1976. The original plan was that we were going to stay for 4 or 5 years until both my mom and dad finished their postgraduate work. And then we were going to go back to India. And as we were here, and again, this was, 50 years ago, there weren't a lot of great opportunities in India in terms of economic opportunities. There's some really good opportunities here. My parents got a job teaching, so we ended up staying. And then next thing you know, 50 years goes by. But the classic immigrant story really starts with the first generation and the ones that take the risk, have the courage to leave a lot behind. In my dad's case, leaving the family behind for 2.5 years, coming get settled in. And then, for us, as we kind of come, we get adjusted. But certainly my parents had certain expectations that, we're here, we have great opportunities. We want to make sure that you take advantage of them.
Yeah. How did being a first generation immigrant shape your mindset?
Well, I think the first thing is my parents made it very clear that we had come to the US not for a social visit. We had come here specifically to take advantage of some of the great educational opportunities that the US afforded that really you couldn't get anywhere else in the world in scale. And so from the get go, we were told very quickly that we're not getting paid for good grades. We don't have the option of making okay grades. You're expected to make the all A's, and that's really the only thing that's acceptable because at the end of the day, uh, excellence, working hard, really appreciating what you have is going to be the core to being successful. And that was kind of the blueprint that my parents lived by, and that's what we learned.
Yeah. And did your family talk much about money when you were growing up? And how did that talking or not talking kind of shape your financial journey to where you are?
It's funny. I People have a hard time believing this, especially with my own kids. But when I got my first job, I was 16 years old. I was sacking groceries at a grocery store. My paycheck would go directly to my dad, and he would cash it. And he put it in my savings account. And at the time, and again, we didn't have much money. So again, it was really meant to be kind of family money to, help us get through, which is fine, except I think in hindsight, one of the things that happened is I never really got a handle for many years on how to manage my own money. I just kind of gave it to my dad, and when I needed money for something, if he deemed that it was worthwhile, then he would,
Necessary.
let me have it. And I always got my needs taken care of. And at the time, I understood where he was coming from. But in looking back, one of the things I wish I had the opportunity to do, and even if that meant making some mistakes, was, having a bit more control over that money where he could have oversight, but let me have access to it. So that is one of the things that I wish that I had more of. And I think when we had kids, it was really important to us at the earliest possible age for them to have access to an account, a bank
Mhm.
account, and for them to have prepaid debit cards where they can really make their own decisions, even if that means that they have 3 days until their next allowance and they have 22 cents in the bank account. That's part of it, and that's how you learn.
Now, what did you think you wanted to do when you were 16?
Gosh, at the time, I just remember thinking I wanted to make a lot of money doing something, and I happened to have a couple of friends whose parents were corporate attorneys, and they had a lot of money, and I thought, "I'm gonna go to law school," and I remember, when I was about 16, 17, I told my mom that after I became a very successful and wealthy attorney, I would buy her a lake house, and that would be my signal for I have really made it.
Mhm.
So it wasn't a noble aspiration. I think it was probably just a function of, we lived pretty frugally, and I just thought I was really willing to do whatever it took to be able to not live frugally anymore.
Now, if you were 16 again, what would you focus on learning in order to get to where you are today?
Yeah, well, let me say that I was incredibly fortunate that my parents taught me some really amazing life lessons. First and foremost, working hard, and really, being respectful to other people, and really seeing things through. Those things were, very important. I would probably go to a couple of things. First would be the money management piece. Is I if I had to do it over again, I wish I had learned a little bit sooner some of the lessons, not just of handling my money, but saving and then even investing. Again, that's something that you can do at a very early age. I did not. This may be hard to believe. I was working, even when I was in college and even when I had a full time job. But I did not have. I did not invest in a mutual fund or any kind of investment instrument until I was 26 years old. So
Mhm.
I had a few years of earning where the money just kind of sat in the bank, not making anything. And, one of the things I always tell folks and tell my kids, but tell others is it is actually those years in your teenage and early 20s when you see the biggest bang for your buck in terms of being able to take a dollar and put it into a savings or an investment vehicle.
Absolutely. And the one thing I hear from every entrepreneur or solopreneur that I have on the show, that was the one thing they wish they had in high school. We None of us had that class or that life experience of here's how to manage your money, here's how to, create that runway of financial stability for yourself.
Right.
So, that's
Yeah.
one of those classes I wish they put in high school.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there is, at the Fed, one of the things that all the Federal Reserve banks do, we have 12 reserve banks, is we have an economic education program. And the idea of teaching financial literacy and financial wellness is really important. And it's got to start very early. So I completely agree with you. I wish it were compulsory, in some ways to really put people in situations where they learn what decision making is like. At the Fed, one of the things that all the Federal Reserve banks do, we have 12 reserve banks, is we have an economic education program. And the idea of teaching financial literacy and financial wellness is really important. And it's got to start very early. So I completely agree with you. I wish it were compulsory, in some ways to really put people in situations where they learn what decision making is like. So if you have limited resources, but you have more things that you want to buy, how do you think about spreading out your desires over time and not spending it immediately? How do you think about money growing for you when you're actually not doing anything? So yes, I would completely agree with that.
What skills matter most in economics, finance, and leadership?
So I might surprise you with this, but I probably won't. So if I just look at economics and say, well, yes, I mean, you should be good with numbers and finance. Numbers are important, and they are. And then and I think that having the math skills are really important. But I think with economics and finance, just like most other areas, the two skills I would think about more than anything else would be, can you listen? And then can you think critically? Um, the listening, I think, is really understated because, and again, this is not something for young people. This is adults through their, whether it's 40s, 50s, 60s. We all struggle with, can I absorb what somebody is telling me without just thinking about what I want to say? Can I really digest what they're saying and then be able to use that information in coming to a conclusion? And that's the critical thinking process. So
Mhm.
the numbers are important, but you can be a math whiz and you can know numbers all day long. But if you're not being able to engage in active listening and you're not able to process that information in a meaningful way, an A in calculus will not get you any further than a C. So I'd go with the listening and then the critical thinking piece.
Now, is college necessary to follow your career path? And if so, what kind of path should they take through training?
If you do want to do something in professional services, whether it's economics or finance, it's incredibly challenging to do so without a college degree. It is not impossible, but I would strongly recommend it for a couple of reasons. One is you actually learn the material, and that's important. The second is, and again, I think this is the key to college, and this goes to, I think, your question about what they should study. Listen, if you know that you want to do economics, great. Then you can take, accounting and you can take some of these other classes and you can go on your way. But I think the core idea of college is really learning how to learn. So I think it's much more important that if you wanted to take history or English literature, or if you wanted to take math or physics, other classes, um, th- your ability to be able to digest different types of information and understand it at a later point, if you decide that you wanted to go into business or economics, you can do that. I'm actually a perfect example. I happened to take a few business classes in my last year of college, but otherwise, that's not what I studied. And it was almost an afterthought. And then when I got to work, what I realized is in my job, I got to apply some of the finance and marketing and other skills, but I was in a position to where I could learn it because I was pretty good at learning. And again, I think that's the real value that something like college can afford.
What subjects do you think students should pay attention to now?
So I think the STEM subjects are great. And again, I think in this day and age, as students are going to have to think about artificial intelligence, what it means to engage with AI and just other technology. I think it's more important than ever. And again, learning computer science is great. Actually, getting in the technical programs, those are fantastic. But I think the real distinguishing factor for folks who are younger and they are going to really be confronted with and have to engage in AI and other automation and other sort of smart tools is the critical thinking piece. Because the great thing about AI is it can make certain repetitive tasks easier. It can do a lot. But at the end of the day, somebody still has to evaluate the work that is being done. And evaluating that work means, can you look at a lot of different things and make sense of it and determine if something is correct or not correct? And so what I would tell that person is, again, if you could take computer science or math, I think the quantitative skills are really important and will serve you well. But most important is if you can take classes that really teach you to think more deeply and that enable you to write more critically. I think those are really valuable.
And what careers connect to economics besides banking?
So, I think this day and age, economics really connects to most careers in some capacity. So we tend to think of it in terms of banking, but the reality is that let's say that you go to work let's say you want to work at a Starbucks in the corporate office, and you want to try to get an understanding of should you be selling iced lattes? Are you selling enough in the summer? Uh, Most people don't think of that as being economics, but even making some of those decisions gets to the heart of what economics is. And so, really, any company that you work for, if you're going to work in accounting, if you're going to work in computer science, whatever you're going to work in, you're going to deal with this issue of I don't have enough resources to do everything that I need to do. So I need to learn how to allocate those resources in a really strong way. The original example I gave was you have $20. That's a resource. How do I get it and how do I allocate it? Do I buy coffee? Do I buy, dress? That same principle, though, applies to everything. You can work on a cruise line and you have six customers come up to you and you only have time to really be able to address three customers' needs. How do you think about triaging or making those decisions? How do you prioritize? In a sense, that is what economics is. It may just not have all the numbers that we're used to.
What is the best way for a teenager to gain experience in this field?
So, one of the things I've told my kids, but I've told a lot of friends' kids that may want some advice in terms of careers and where they want to go, and so maybe they're in high school and they want to get a job. Um, I am very adamant about the fact that the most important thing you can do is just work. It is not like where you work. It is not like I need this, I need an air conditioned office job. I need to be doing social media or I need to be doing this. Um, Wherever you work, the skills that you really want to pick up on, especially in your teenage years, that will serve you well, but we never really talk about. But I will tell you firsthand from running a couple of companies, but also talking to businesses in my role at the Fed, even things like being able to show up on the job. If your job starts at 8 o'clock, coming in at 7:55 and not 8:03. Those are the kinds of skills that are incredibly important they will serve you well in everything that you do. So if you have an opportunity to go somewhere where you can be held accountable, that you need to be somewhere at some time, there are tasks that you're accountable for, where people rely on you for making sure that you show up and you get things done. Those are the best habits you can learn. And it could be any product or it could be any service. I would not worry about where you're working, just as long as that job feeds those things.
And what he just mentioned about time and project management are the topics of books 2 and book 3, and there's worksheets to go with them. And from the STEM camp where I just had a keynote talk, the girls who did the worksheets, and one of the worksheets is a science experiment on yourself, but you are the scientist and the experiment all in one. And they made a lot of realizations about themselves in time. And I think that's the best way to discover that is doing these types of experiments on yourself. So, everyone, if today's conversation is helping you think differently about money, careers, and the future and time, share this episode with a friend, a parent, or a teacher. Now, give us some insights into those reports that you see come across your desk every day. What financial challenges are families facing right now?
There are a lot of challenges right now, and I would start with a very basic one. Um, Things that we use every day just cost more than they did 5 years ago. Some of that was is remnants from COVID. Some of that is some of the changes that we saw. But if you go to a grocery store, chances are the things that you're buying today, maybe they're not more than they were 6 months ago, but there's a strong possibility that they cost a good bit more than they did 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And that's true with buying a car or buying clothes or going out to a restaurant. To get a sandwich at a restaurant, if you went 3 years ago, there is a strong possibility that you're paying a good bit more. So the challenge that a 14-year-old would have in making the decision on the $20 is the same challenge that families have, except they're dealing with a little bit more than $20, and they're dealing with, not discretionary expenses they can choose, but you have to pay rent. Rents are higher. You got to pay utility costs. Utilities are higher. You need groceries. Groceries cost more. So the fact that there are more demands on people's money, and the actual amount of money has not gone up very much. So those decisions become more difficult, especially if families are dealing with, not a decision of, do I buy a cup of coffee or do I buy, an extra outfit? Do I put gas in the car or do I put food on the table? And those are much more serious consequences. And I think, that's for a lot of families, these are some of the choices that they're having to think through on a daily or weekly basis.
What worries you most about financial literacy in America?
I think the main thing is just the idea of, when do people have their first opportunity to fail or to make a mistake with very little consequences, which I think that, because really financial literacy, so, I could sit down and you could sit down with a group of students and we could have classes all day long. And I mean, we can have classes for 2 or 3 years and we can talk about it and draw it up on, in a PowerPoint and sort of talk about it. But unless it's somehow translated into hey, here's some money, from my job that I got, or here's some money from my allowance, or I'm mowing some lawns and I got, $50. Let me figure out how to use it. You and I both know that your best learnings in life are when you've made a mistake. And then you're like, oh gosh, I felt a little pain with that mistake. My biggest concern is I want people to make the mistake when it's $10 or when it's 15 and when there's a backstop, not when they have to get a car repossessed because they couldn't afford the payments, they didn't think it through, and now they can't get to work and then they lose their job. So when you get to your 20s and you're talking about real world consequences, that's what really worries me. So I want people not just to have an opportunity to study it. More important is to practice some of the principles.
If every high school student learned 5 money skills before graduation, what do you think those skills should be?
See, could I come up with 5, money skills? One is, so again, first I would start with kind of the sort of the 3 things of spending, saving, and investing. And, like, I would make it very clear, spending is not a bad word. It is not bad to spend. There is nothing wrong with spending. And sometimes, the solution is not like, "Oh, I don't wanna spend anything," because you run into issues with then you try to sort of hold up, and then you go on a big spree because you can't stand anymore. Spending is fine. It's really good. The saving is the next thing, and that is there is also a time just to have some money set aside, like if you might need it. It could be something that, your favorite act was coming to a concert in town and you didn't realize it. And but hey, look, I have $50 put away that I could buy the ticket right now as opposed to waiting a few months. So I might want to have some money that's immediately accessible. And the third thing is the investing. And that is, look, there should always be some money that I should plan to not need, that is not part of my life, and that I can put it into some type of financial vehicle. And if you're younger, if you're not 19 or 21, it could be through a parent or it could be through a guardian or somebody else, helping to set up, a mutual fund or some type of investment account. So I would start with those 3 things. And again, probably use a couple of the broader lessons that we've talked about. And that is, I think credit can be a good thing. Again, it can teach good lessons. So this is not like a credit cards are dangerous and stay away. It's really learn how that they can be helpful, in society.
Now, we're going to go down a completely different path now to networking because this is one of those things that I think is so important for teenagers and adults. But for teenagers who hear the word networking and then immediately cringe and they go, "Oh, I don't want to go do that. I have to go talk to people." What does networking actually mean? How do you actually use your networking abilities?
Sure. And Loxley, in full disclosure, I tend to be introverted. And I am not a big fan of it is not easy or natural for me to go into a big group of, 50 people and I don't really know anybody there. And I'm like, oh, who do I talk to? And so if you're younger and you're like, oh, that makes me feel uncomfortable, join the club. Like this, it is not something that is easy. And I don't want it, thought of that somehow, by the time you become 21, you should magically love cocktail parties and you should magically love these events. People have different personalities and some, some are much more comfortable in smaller groups, etc. The way that I think about networking, though, is not there are 100 people there and let me shake hands with 30 people. Networking can sometimes have different connotations. I don't even really think of it as networking as much as I do just carrying on a conversation with somebody. And again, there are 2 parts of the conversation. The most important is the listening and being but the second one, which is often not thought of, most people say it's listening and then talking. I would amend that. It's listening and then asking questions. And so it's fine to share your own experience. So don't think of networking as being that I somehow have to schmooze 30 people. I really think of it as being, can I carry on a conversation one person at a time? And
Mhm.
if I just focus on, listen, really all I have to do is listen to what somebody is saying and then ask a couple of questions that I think might be interesting. People love talking about themselves. And if you can get into the habit of asking questions to kind of show your interest in that person, you will be amazed at how your relationships grow. So I would really think about networking in that way. I would also mention, because personalities are very different, that you should not feel inhibited that if I can't be comfortable among 20 or 30 people, that I'm somehow doing something wrong. There are lots of different positions and careers out there.
Mhm.
I always knew that there are certain sales positions I would never do because it involves a certain level of interaction. It's just not comfortable. It's not that I can't do it. It's not something that's very natural for me. So I would really encourage folks to find what is their level of comfort with having a conversation with somebody. It could be a good friend. It could be somebody that you're just meeting. But I would just start it at one person and not sort of think of it as needing to schmooze an entire group of people in a large hall.
Yeah. Now, it's funny that you say that because you're the incoming president for the largest Kiwanis International Club in the world
That's right.
here in Birmingham. Did not expect that. When I read that, I was like, wow, we have got a fantastic group of people living here in Birmingham.
We do.
But why do clubs like the downtown Birmingham Kiwanis Club, why is that so special? And why is that community that's built there such a special one?
Well, so the first thing I would start with is that the Kiwanis community is really sort of founded on the principle of service to younger people, and so there are a lot of things that we do in service to each other. But the other thing that I would mention is it's a great opportunity to get to know each other. And I was talking about networking before. We have over 450 members, and in any given meeting, we might have 100 plus, people that come, and again, and some folks I've never met before, but I love the opportunity to engage, even if it's getting my lunch, and you would come with me one time, and we sit down, and I might be sitting and just talking to somebody one on one, and it could be somebody that I sort of met. So we're the largest Kiwanis club in the world, but I feel like the interactions can happen on a one-on-one basis, on
Yeah.
just a smaller basis, and that's, to me, the best way to get to know people, and I really appreciate that about the club.
Yeah, and I've really grown to appreciate the club because of the couple of people that I've met and said they would do something, and by the end of that day, they had done that, and
Mm.
that is not something that you normally see anymore. So I've got a fond appreciation for the Kiwanis Club now. And this leads us to how important it is for our young ones, our young professionals, to grow some really strong relationships. Can you give some advice as to that?
Yes, first is it is not how many relationships you have, it's developing good quality ones. Um, my kids are actually very, very different. My daughter is very comfortable with a small group of friends. She's known them for a long time. That's kinda how she hangs. My son is never met a stranger, just the more people, the merrier. He's very comfortable, and there's no right or wrong, but I would say that the quality of the relationship is important. I think that everybody needs to be able to develop relationships. But the other thing that I would mention is that the relationships can be founded on another principle. So you mentioned Kiwanis. Well, a lot of middle and high schools have key clubs, which is a Kiwanis club basically for high schools for teenagers. So if you're younger and if your school happens to have a key club, it's a great opportunity to meet people. But the way that you meet people is within the context of we're doing service together or we're doing something that kind of unites us. So again, this doesn't have to be I need to have a 30-minute conversation with and just to know who you are. It could be opportunities where, you find a club or you find something that you're interested in and you find 3 or 4 other people that also have that same interest. And then, you spend half a day doing some service work, in honor of that interest or, going to a football game together. So there are a lot of different ways I think that you can develop relationships. And I would encourage folks to find opportunities that feel right for them, in terms of how they do it.
Do you know someone with an amazing career and a story worth sharing? Visit booksthatbuildskills.org and nominate a future guest to be on the show through our Contact Us page because we always want the most interesting and informed industry experts here giving you great advice. Now we're down to the rapid fire round where hope you can handle this quickly as you can, short answers. And these can go into some long discussions, but we're going to keep it rapid fire. So, best financial advice you've ever received?
And this was later in my life, always have a system where a certain percentage of your paycheck or the money that comes in can go to an account that you cannot readily access. Out of sight, out of mind. So if you never see the money come through your account, you won't miss it. And that is the best strategy for saving.
The biggest money myth.
The more money I have, the more financially secure I will be. Everybody always feels like, oh, if I just got this raise, I'm having financial problems, I will make more. The reality is that the more money you make, the problems simply get larger. And you don't solve a money problem with simply more money.
What is one book every teen should read?
That's a really good question. So there are a couple of finance books for adults, and I think they have kids' versions of them, like The Psychology of Money. Again, if this was just sort of financial literacy, even kind of they have like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is kind of interesting in terms of thinking about how behaviors in terms of attitudes towards money work. But most important thing is just read a book. And then you can look at other sources as well.
Yeah. Most important life skill.
Probably I would go back to the first thing that I said, and that is being able to listen to other people.
Mm-hmm. And which of these three? Spend, save, or invest?
Well, all three, but if you made me pick one, I would say invest. That's where money is actually working for you while you're sleeping, while you're having fun, while you're not doing anything.
Yeah. And to finish this out, what is one thing you hope young people remember from this conversation?
So I hope they remember from the conversation that there is not one simple answer to any of this. There should never, if you're ever in a situation where somebody is lecturing you that this is exactly what to do with your money, I would be a little bit worried by that. I think there are a lot of different strategies. The most important thing is find what makes sense, what's comfortable, rely on the experience and of advice of other folks that have been through it. It could, and a lot of times it's your parents, but it may not be. In my case, it was not my parents that I relied on. I really had to, I relied on some outside friends. So find people that you trust that have experienced what you think you're going to go through and see how they went through it. And sometimes we don't just have to learn from our own mistakes. We can learn from those of others as well.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Anoop. Well, if you enjoyed today's conversation, this episode is a reminder that life skills like budgeting, planning, decision making, and communication matter just as much as academics. Be sure to follow Careers IRL so you don't miss future episodes. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and keep exploring what's possible.